What is a modern rifleman's rifle? It's actually a really hard episode to do, a really hard thing to define. Because the perfect rifle, much like the perfect man or the perfect woman, save our Savior Christ Jesus, the perfect man, God made flesh. But perfection here on this earth in a fallen world is hard to attain. So let's start this episode with realizing there is no perfect rifle, and it's even easier to define for a more specialized role. But even in a specialized role where it's easier to find, like, there's no perfect prairie dog rifle. There's no perfect deer rifle. If there was, everybody would just have that deer rifle. There are really good choices and really poor choices, and a sliding scale in between the two. Defining a modern rifleman's rifle. I don't relish doing this episode, but I think it's important. I actually put an episode like this out long ago for the patrons tackling this, and I probably got a little bit more in-depth and real with the patrons than I will be here today, because that's the nature of Patreon, right? So if you don't want to miss out on that content, go to Patreon and become a patron. They had this long ago, very similar content, and I probably talked about many things I won't talk about on this episode for gunfighter life. But what is a modern rifleman's rifle? That's enough of a preamble. Welcome to Gunfighter Life. Saddle up for another episode where we talk about guns, gunfighting tactics, the right way with Almighty God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. Alright, let's start with some pretty easy ones. Reliability. It has to be reliable. If a gun does not go bang, then its accuracy is 0. So before we even talk about accuracy, reliability, right? The accuracy could be, theoretically, 0.2 MOA. But if that was an important shot and you pulled the trigger and there was no bang, the accuracy there is 0. It must be dependable. It must be rugged. It must be reliable. Now let's talk about accuracy. I think 2 MOA is a decent goal. Now this is the most flexible one on the list. You could have guns that don't quite meet the 2 MOA, but would still pass everything else, and I'd say they're a modern rifleman's rifle. But, especially with modern technology, a good 2 MOA rifle is not hard to attain. Most people will throw out the 1 MOA thing, not really understanding what that means. But I'm talking a solid 2 MOA. Like any given day, when you have a cold and it's hot outside and the sun is in your eyes and you just drop the rifle off the back of your tailgate and picked it up and you throw it in the bench, it will shoot whatever distance you have it zeroed at within 2 MOA of that point of aim. Point of aim, point of impact, 2 MOA. You could theoretically have a rifle that shoots a half MOA, but it shoots a tiny little half MOA group in a different spot on different days. And it goes outside of that 2 MOA parameter. So that would not meet the requirements. But that accuracy, and blending into that, we talked about consistency. On any given day, it's got to do those things. It's got to be reliable, and it's got to be accurate. On any given day, not under the best conditions, not when you're shooting off the best rest, under the best lighting with your optic on the highest magnification, it's capable of shooting 2 MOA. Like any given day. If you can, under ideal conditions, shoot an MOA or under an MOA, that's fantastic. But that is not what we're talking about. We're talking about a good go-to dependability, accuracy standard. Now let's talk about speed. It should have a repeatable rate of fire. Single shots are out. As much as I love, and I think one of the most beautiful guns ever made by humans, is a Ruger No. 1 stainless RSI international stock. It's single shot. It's a beautiful gun. It's a elegant gun. It is an aristocrat among rifles. It doesn't meet this criteria. It's a single shot. It does not have a reasonable rate of fire. A repeatable rate of fire. I'm not even talking about capacity. Let's put capacity on the table. Not that I'm not a D word, right? I'm not a Democrat. I don't think that you should be limited to 10 rounds or 7 rounds or whatever. But that's not really super important. If you can't hit with your first round, your second round, your third round, the fact that you have 27 more is really inconsequential to me for a modern practical rifleman's rifle. You can have that many if you want. I just don't think it's a go-to criteria. Now let's talk about a big one. And this is going to kick, sadly, a lot of guns out of the running. And there's really no reason to, especially with today's technology, but weight. And much like Jeff Cooper kind of wavered on his scout rifle weight, and some people would put that, the expert that I know puts it as good, better, best, between 6.6 pounds, 7 pounds, 7.7. But let's be generous and say under 8 pounds. So 7.9, 7.99, under 8 pounds. Under 8 pounds. I'm not even going to put a length requirement on it, because if it's under that, it's probably going to meet the length requirements. But let's just put a mass requirement. 7.99999 pounds. Or for those listening across the pond or our friends up in the Great White North, 3.628 kilograms. And again, that's going to knock a lot of guns out of the running. Sadly, because a lot of these guns today are built to be shot off the bench, and that's not what I'm talking about. You can have a great PRS rifle that'll shoot a quarter MOA all day long, and it weighs 18 pounds. No interest in that for a modern rifleman's rifle. That's a specialized rifle. It's great at what it does. It's specialty. So weight requirements, under 8 pounds. Now, here's what's going to kick even more modern rifles. That weight requirement kicks a lot of the classic rifles out, like a lot of the Enfields or things like that. You need to be able to hit a man-sized silhouette, like a B-27, or one of those Marine Corps Green Ivan targets, or a deer-sized silhouette in the vitals at 300 meters. With iron sights, and that knocks out, sadly, a giant swath of the modern rifles that would meet the weight requirement. I still think, call me a Luddite, but I still think going in, trudging into 2024, or skipping into 2024, depending on your emotional state, I guess, physical emotional state, going into 2024, I still think a modern rifleman's rifle should be equipped with iron sights. And you can get a gun and have it drilled and tapped or install iron sights, but it's probably easier for most guns nowadays to get one that has iron sights, because most are going to come drilled and tapped and install an optic. But it should have a way to meet that requirement, hit that silhouette, or get a good, capable shot on a deer at 300 meters with irons. Sans glass. No glass. No scope a la mode. No scope on top. Just irons. And I'm not going to specify it has to be a peep sight. Peep sights are usually better, but with mounting optics, they're not always the best. A good leaf sight, right? And let's look at what I would consider old tech for this, right? A good, not just some cheap piece together from random Soviet bloc country parts, but a good, decent made, like Polish or something, I was thinking AK, but SKS or AK-47, right? You can get good hits on a man-sized torso target at 300 meters. Assuming you can get one good enough that'll shoot 2 MOA, and it's not impossible, as many people as say those guns are not accurate. A lot of that has to do with the garbage ammo. If you buy the cheapest bottom of the barrel 4 or 5 MOA ammo, then that's a 4 or 5 MOA gun with that ammo. But if you get really good ammo, you would be surprised, and I think more AKs would pass that litmus test than a lot of people give them credit for. So an AK-47 or an SKS, right? They would pass that, but the SKS misses on the weight requirement. She's a little bit too heavy. You can find a variant under 8 pounds, I say go for it. If you can hollow out the stock and pump some helium in there, or whatever you got to do, then go for it. I'm not for taking a classic SKS, they're a great rifle, and Bubba-izing them, redneckifying them, whatever you want to call it. But if you get one that's already had that and has a lighter weight stock or something, and it makes the under 8-pound requirement, it would meet this. AK-47s, if it's a good, accurate one, not every one, and not all of them, despite common belief, are dependable, especially some of the junk ones that have been pieced together and sold on the American market. But an actual good military grade AK-47 that'll meet the 2 MOA requirement, that is within the weight requirement, that'll do. Now, just like the SKS, some of these are going to be overweight. Some of these may need to go on a diet. Some of these variants are just going to be too heavy. They're not going to be able to get light enough. But some of the AK variants should be light enough to meet this requirement. Really depending on the variant. And because of that, some of the M16/AR-15 variants aren't going to make this test either. Because a lot of them, sadly, have gotten so obese that they're just too big to be practical. But since it's a lighter weight design to begin with, it gives you a little bit more leeway. I think a lot of the AR-15 variants, M16 variants, M forgeries will pass that test, the weight test and the accuracy. And there's a reason, right? There's a reason why the de facto American rifle of our time, AR-15, stands for Armor Light Rifle. But if it stood for America's rifle, it would make sense. And I think many of these, if they have good usable iron sights, and many do, they would pass this test as well. Right? And probably not with green tip. I don't consider green tip a 2 MOA round. It may be. But with good ammo, right, a lot of the M4 variants with good iron sights would pass this. And I think that makes sense. And there's a reason I picked 300 yards, not arbitrarily. And that's max point blank range. Now, max point blank range doesn't get a lot of press today with all the modern long range shooting, but that modern long range shooting has to do with knowing your range, which has to do with electronics and technology and time. Right? It's all great if you have time to range an elk on the side of a mountain and figure out that it's 387 yards away versus 354 yards away, which you probably can't tell with the naked eye. Your drop is going to be 6 inches more with your cartridge, and you can dial it in on a dial. All while, sipping hot coffee out of a Yeti thermos. If that's how you want to hunt, and it's not impractical for that scenario, but for a modern rifleman's rifle, I'd say that's not practical. Max point blank range is, I think, in my opinion, infinitely more practical. The fact that you can aim at the center of a given target, and I'm talking not like a walnut. I'm talking like a human-sized target or the chest cavity of a deer-sized target. Aim and hit that target somewhere in the acceptable zone. That's your max point-blank range. Not like Hollywood where they say point-blank and they mean like a couple of feet. Max point-blank range means that I can aim at said acceptable target zone and hit acceptable target zone without any added dope, without any added elevation, without any clicks of a scope, without any windage adjustment, and all but like gale force winds. That's what I'm talking about, max point blank range. And there are many modern cartridges that will do that at 300 yards. In fact, most of the common ones we're going to talk about, 5.56, 308, just the two big examples, right? They will do that. They will achieve that. Some will do it better than others, but if I aim, and I might cheat a little bit higher, cheat a little bit low, or whatever, but I can aim somewhere in that acceptable target zone and hit that target zone somewhere. And why is that more practical in my opinion? Well, with my training and experience, which you might be familiar with, when you're getting shot at, when you have rounds inbound, when somebody you know and love has been shot or you have been injured, hopefully your OODA loop goes to shoot, move, communicate. If you can think about just getting the sights on the target and giving a good trigger press, that's great. Probably that's not the time to be worried about dialing dope and how many clicks is it and what's the last target I shot and what is my scope set on? Is it set for 500 yards? I don't remember. And did I return to 0 last time I went shooting with my rifle off a bench at super long range? Like, there's nothing wrong with that kind of shooting, but that's not what I'm talking about here for a modern rifleman's rifle. practical, simple. Max point blank range. I'd say 300 meters. And that because there's plenty of rounds that will do that. This rules out like your PCCs, right? PCCs can be fun. They can be a lot of fun. But that probably wouldn't be my choice for a modern rifleman's rifle. It just has the trajectory, the arc of a rainbow, which is pretty much going to make this a, and when I say modern, I mean like within the last 150 years of technology, like bottlenecked, Spitzer bullet, intermediate or full-powered rifle cartridge. And there's nothing revolutionary about this kind of rifle. Again, a decent M4, like a Colt 6920, with a old school carry handle will do all this. And again, I'm not against optics, but I think it's still a good, useful skill to be able to shoot and make hits with iron sights. So this rifle should be able to leverage that. Also, redundancy of sighting systems. I'll give you an example. When I was looking to go to Alaska, I was looking for an Alaska rifle, and a lot of these criteria were similar, and it was hard to get. I had some additional criteria, and I had to not get everything that I wanted. But I wanted iron sights, because I know me, and I know how I break stuff. And I fell probably over 10 times with that rifle in Alaska, like falling on it, falling on the rifle sometimes, and just thankfully it did not lose zero. The scope was fine, the mounts were fine, everything was fine. Used good quality glass, good solid mounts. Likewise, I came back here to Idaho and was hunting just north of the Hells Canyon area, some pretty treacherous terrain, and I hunted pretty hard. I don't know if I fell on the rifle or I snagged it on something or slid down something, and the scope mount came loose. And we're talking like really good, best of the best scope mounts. And really good glass, but it came loose. So you just never know. And thankfully, that rifle, much like I'm advising here, it had backup iron sights. So my hunt was not done that day. I was confident the iron sights were still zeroed. You may have it the other way where your iron sight snaps off, your front sight breaks or gets messed up or something, and your scope is still fine, but that's what I'm talking about. The redundancy is important. But much like I think, if you're going to be a good, well-rounded operator of a motor vehicle, you should know how to drive a manual transmission. A stick shift. Okay. If you're going to be a rifleman, you should be able to shoot a rifle with iron sights. Well, let's get to optics. If we're talking about a modern rifleman's rifle, I think you need no greater than 4 power on a low end. I'm not against variable power scopes, but be honest, a lot of times I prefer a fixed power scope. They're just simpler. The internals are simpler. Talking about being rugged and reliable, they have less moving parts. But low end, 4 power. And it doesn't have to be adjustable. But any higher than that, it's, I think, impractical for a modern rifleman stuff. For shooting stationary targets at long range, yeah, higher power is fine. For zeroing your rifle off a bench, it's fine. But if your target is moving, probably not fine. If you're doing a spot and stalk hunt and your target gets ambushed, let's say, at 30 yards and it's running, probably you don't want a lot of magnification for that. You probably have noticed a lot of this if you're a big fan of the Scout Rifle. A lot of this is similar to the Scout Rifle, but I'm not going to specify a forward-mounted optic. I know there are reasons for a forward-mounted optic. I understand why Jeff Coover picked it, but I'm not going to stipulate it for this. Certainly not. It also gives you a lot more freedom into where to mount the scope. Most rifles, unless it's a dedicated Scout Rifle, are not going to have a forward-mounted optic. They're going to have an optic mounted over the receiver. And if I'm being honest, I think it's a wash. I think you get benefits from the forward-mounted optic. You get benefits from the traditional mounted optic. I'd call it 50-50, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. So I don't care. I'm not a Luddite, or I don't consider myself a Luddite. A good optic can be a force multiplier. So as long as you have good iron sights, and not just like vestigial iron sights, like they're just a token nod to having iron sights, but you, with the iron sights on your rifle, can get good hits on a man-sized silhouette at 300 meters, and a better shooter gets more leeway there, right? It's going to be easier to get those hits with a peep sight than with a leaf sight, but if you're good with iron sights, A lot of those older just leaf sights like you would find on an old Remington 700 or an old Winchester Model 70, you can get good hits on a man-sized silhouette at 300 meters with just those very basic sights if you're good enough. But after that, if you want to mount an optic and be able to increase your range, that's fine. If you want an LPVO or a fixed 2 or a fixed 4, that's great. And thankfully, the 4 power on the low end, a lot of your classic hunting scopes, your 3 to 9, that'll work fine. Here's a big caveat to that. If you shoot both eyes open, if you can shoot magnified optics with both eyes open, if you cannot, I would advise you don't even get magnified optics. Either stick with the irons or go with an LPVO, meaning like a 1 power or a scout scope where you can shoot with both eyes open. Now, it's called the Binden concept. I can. Many people can, whether I'm shooting rifle, shotgun, handgun, unless there's some crazy criteria like the sun is in one eye, I'll almost always shoot with both eyes open, no matter what I'm shooting, no matter what power scope. Some people can't do that. If you're not there yet, or you haven't learned to do that, I think for practical situations, you're better off having 40% more peripheral vision than a little bit more magnification. So if you can't shoot with a magnified optic with both eyes open, you should probably work on that before you worry about the magnification. And that's a big thing. If you are shooting any kind of weapon for any kind of practical purpose and you're learning rifleman skills where you may have to use it for any kind of defense or any kind of shooting other than like bench rest shooting, learn to shoot with both eyes open. You have 2 eyes for a reason. Peripheral vision is important in a dynamic situation. So both eyes open. And if you can shoot with both eyes open, there's nothing wrong with like a fixed 4. Or if you were going the more tactical route on this, if you wanted to go like a Trijicon ACOG. I was one of the early adopters in Iraq of the Trijicon ACOG, Advanced Combat Optical Gun Sight. They later became standard issue, but they were originally issued to like good shooters, like expert riflemen, of which I was blessed to be an expert rifleman in the Marine Corps. I was in the infantry, and that's just a fixed power scope. Or not even a scope, it's a fixed power prism sight. And those are great. There's nothing wrong with that if you can shoot both eyes open. But I think being able to shoot with both eyes open is exponentially more important than higher magnification. Now, I might get some pushback on that from people that only know how to shoot with one eye closed or whatever, but I'm going to tell you, if you're talking about being a good all-around rifleman, way better, way more important, I think, that you learn to shoot with both eyes open than you get a higher magnification scope or optic. Not that that can't be better in some situations, but for the vast majority, shooting with both eyes open in a real world, whether tactical or practical environment, is more important. And I realize that might be an unpopular opinion, and I'm okay with that. Okay, so I guess let's transition to some, and this is not an all-inclusive list, right? There are a lot of guns that I'm not going to talk about that would make the list. That's why I gave you the list first and not telling you, oh, buy this model of gun, or hopefully you appreciate that I'm not just some gun tuber that's getting free guns and money from some company saying, look at this cool new gun, buy it, it's great, it does everything, it slices, it dices, it does your taxes, right? I'm not that guy. I give you the criteria, you choose what you want. If you don't like any of my options, choose your own thing. But many M4, M16s, classic M16A2, not the best rifle. I went to war with one, mine was just beat. Mine was honestly not a great rifle. But a good M16A2 variant with that long sight radius, a rifle gas system, and good iron sights, that'll check all those boxes. It's not great for mounting an optic, but with a gooseneck, you can do it. Again, probably the most common is some kind of M4 variant, an M4 of some kind. It'll meet the weight requirement with a good peep sight, which the M16, AR-15 pattern is kind of known for. You can definitely meet all those criteria. It's a good choice. The cartridge checks the box. Going to be able to give you that point-blank range. Obviously, rate of fire is a check in the box. And that's just one way to think about it, right? There are many, many things. Another one, the scout rifle. I'm not saying this rifle has to be a scout rifle, but a scout rifle checks a lot of those boxes, as long as it meets the accuracy requirement. And I really, really like my Ruger scout rifle, but out of the box, it did not meet that requirement. It did not meet that accuracy requirement. I had to do some gunsmithing to it. I had to free float it and bet it. The accuracy out of the box, honestly, was a little atrocious. It was a little appalling for a modern rifle. Now, with work, I got it to make the requirements. And after that, it's a fantastic rifle. It's an omnivore. It likes a bunch of different loads. It'll shoot a bunch of loads well. Talk about rugged and reliable. Yep, controlled round feed. Just based on the Mauser 98 action / Winchester Pre-64 Model 70 Rifleman's rifle action. Just checks all the boxes. Now, after the work's been done to it, it's mounted with a fixed 2-power scope. It's got good, decent iron sights. It checks those boxes, right? Another one that I don't own but looks decent is the Savage Hog Hunter. 7.3 pounds. You can get it in some cool calibers. It's got decent iron sights. I was playing with one once. I don't own one, but I was like, wow, what a good practical rifle. Whether or not there are any hogs where you live, it's a good practical rifle. It's got decent iron sights. It's a Savage, so if it's like any other Savage I've ever had and ever shot, crazy accurate. Like, should go well above and beyond that accuracy requirement. Bolt action, so reasonable rate of fire. Not as good as a semi-auto, but reasonable. Not as good as a controlled round feed, in my opinion, but still pretty reliable. It makes the weight requirements. You can mount a good modern optic on it. So you get the idea, right? Check, 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 check in the boxes. Now, a lot of lever actions are out because a lot of lever actions are either in pistol calibers or more antiquated rounds like the 30-30, which is a phenomenal round. But maybe if you finagle it and reloaded and loaded some lighter than normal grain bullets or whatever, you could meet that 300-yard point blank range, but I don't think with most ammo you're going to get there. But there are some options like the Browning BLR, Browning lever action rifle. Added cool factor, they even make a takedown, and they make them in a lot of modern cartridges. 243 would certainly check that box. 308 check, 30-06 check. It's within the weight limits. They have good iron sights. You got it. You see what I'm talking about, right? Check, check, check. It checks all the boxes. So you get what I'm saying there. You shouldn't... And now those are some good models. If you want to pick one of those models or you have one of those models, that's great. But the goal is not for me to give you a list of these are the only 5 practical guns, or however many I've said. It's for the criteria for a modern rifleman's rifle. And you may have additional criteria or decide one of those don't matter, right? Maybe you are just 325 pounds of muscle and bone and 5% body fat, and you can bump that up to 9-10 pounds and hike all day long and ruck a full pack up and down mountains, and the fact that the rifle weighs 9 pounds doesn't matter to you. But before you go heavy on the weight limit, make sure that you can actually move with that rifle for a long period of time. You may decide to put more criteria, like I really like stainless steel, or better, right? I don't like blued. Now you may live in some areas or stay in some areas where that doesn't matter to you, but for me, I like stainless or as good or better. So Cerakote would be okay. A good nitride, like a good QPQ quench, polished quench nitride, phenomenal. That would be fine. Good chrome lined barrel, I would say even better than stainless. If you can get a good chrome lined chamber and bore, which many ARs will have that, like my Scar 17 has that. So you get the idea there. You might add other criteria. One that is a nice to have but not a has to have for me is a muzzle brake of some kind. And not because I'm trying to be super cool or cut down on my split time or, hide from enemies at night in the jungle, because I can drop guns, and it's not uncommon for me to drop a gun. And if you drop it on the muzzle, that can give you some real problems if you mess with the crown, with the rifling, with the lands and the grooves. That's not an uncommon thing for me to drop a gun or to smash a gun into something. I mostly like whether it's a flash hider or a muzzle brake or just a simple bird cage, mostly just to protect the muzzle. So for me, that's really nice to have. I'm not saying it's a go or no-go gauge, but it's a nice to have a protected muzzle. I didn't talk about it, but one for you. You might decide it has to take M-LOK, right? It has to have a modern M-LOK kind of 4 rail. If it doesn't have that, then you're not interested. You want to be able to mount a white light to it, I'd say good to go on you. That makes a lot of sense for a lot of people. And if that's one of your added criteria, then that's fine. This is not gospel, right? You can season to taste. You can put a little bit of extra garlic in there and some ghost pepper if you want to do a little bit of a different dish. You can do what you want. These are just my thoughts. And again, it's not gospel. It's not unchangeable. It's not the word, right? You can change it. You can decide you don't even like that criteria at all. You can decide yours has to be semi-auto. You can decide yours can only be bolt action because you don't trust semi-autos, right? Again, you can season the dish to taste. You can add extra salt. It's okay. As I aforementioned, this is a hard thing to do because it's kind of so dynamic and so fluid. But a modern rifleman's rifle, and rifle is a tool. A gun is a tool. Can you take that rifle and turn your potential energy into kinetic energy, your potential skill into realized performance on target? What I mean by that, like if you don't know what I'm talking about, it's been a while since we've taken physics, right? If I have an atomic bomb, it has a lot of potential energy until that bomb gets dropped by a B-52 or whatever they drop them with now. A bomb's pretty antiquated, probably a ballistic missile, but you get the idea. Until it's detonated, it's potential. When it's detonated, that's kinetic energy. If I take that A-bomb or hydrogen bomb or H-bomb, whatever you want to, whatever, right? I don't care. You get the idea. If I take that massive amount of energy and I go somewhere in the Nevada desert and bury it, and it degrades into oblivion, that massive amount of energy was not realized in the way that it could be for kinetic energy. It's potential energy. You have, hopefully, potential rifle skill in you. The rifle should be a tool to turn that potential energy into kinetic energy, into rounds on target at reasonable distances, at a reasonable cadence by you. And a tool that does that best for you is a great choice for you. So define practical for you, define modern rifleman for you. Obviously, I was thinking about this when I was developing the Modern Rifleman's Course of Fire. Now, maybe bad marketing on my part, but I put that out there for free. It should be open source. I did an entire episode. You can go back and look it up. Modern Rifleman Course of Fire. You can get out there and train yourself. I encourage you to get good professional training, but it's a good litmus test. It's a good course of fire. You can treat it as a qualification if you're doing a church security thing, if you're doing, a mutual assistance group. If you just want it for yourself, because if you don't know U.S. Code 10, every man in America between 17 and 45 is in the militia, unless there's like some criteria like you're blind. But there are some exceptions like that. But pretty much if you're a male between 17 and 45 in America, you're in the militia. You want to have that as your litmus test, as your go, no-go gauge. You don't even want to do it as a qual. You just want to go out and again, turn that kinetic energy into potential on target. Go and look at that Modern Rifleman Course of Fire. It's in the show notes of that episode for free. Now, if you want, and it should be worth it, for far less than a fraction of the cost of a box of ammo, become a patron. Again, this whole idea of what is a modern rifleman's rifle, the patrons had this a long time ago, and they got content that's not in here. And they get a lot of content that's not in here. So if you don't want to miss out on that content, become a patron. They get a lot of insider-only content. And that Modern Rifleman Course of Fire, there's a post on there where it's just laid out better. There's pictures. You can see how I did when I shot it. There's a PDF where you can print it out instead of just trying to read it in the show notes, right? It's printed out. There's pictures that are color-coded. I even broke out the crayons. Make fun of me because I'm an ex-Marine, right? Because I'm playing with crayons. No crayons were eaten in the making of this episode. But I even color-coded, it was actually colored pencils, but color-coded the stages in the course of fire so it makes it easier for you. You know, all that. Patreon post. Consider becoming a patron. Also, an episode I'm thinking about doing, so make sure you're like, subscribed, following the show, whatever vernacular they use on your platform you're listening on training rifles. If you don't want to go full powered and you want to train with a training rifle that will turn this potential into realized effectiveness on target, what are some good modern rifleman training rifles? I'm kicking that around. That may happen in the future, but if you're following and subscribed, you know, you should find out about it when it comes out. So make sure you're following and subscribed, and if you want that extra content, that special content, become a patron. That is going to bring us to the tactical tip of the day. And then the tactical verse of the day. Slings. Pretty much any go-to rifle, even if it's not a modern rifleman rifle, even if it doesn't check those boxes, should have a decent sling. Not all slings are created equal. That's a skill that ties into being a rifleman. Even harkens back to days of yore, even before what I would consider the modern rifleman, your forefathers, right? That rich heritage of being a rifleman. Knowing how to shoot with a sling and how to use that sling to aid not only in carrying the rifle, but to aid in accuracy, practical accuracy, shooting offhand. And offhand means standing unsupported, for if you're not familiar, if you haven't shot competition with a rifle. Offhand, standing unsupported, and using that sling for help. Even in prone position, using that sling to make you more effective. The sling is a tool for more. It should be, if it's a good practical sling, it should be used for more than just carrying the rifle sometimes. If you need that extra accuracy, you can wring it out of that sling. So look into slings like the old web sling that can be used as a good marksmanship sling, a Rhodesian sling, or even just making a hasty sling out of a common 2-point sling. And figuring out what that tension is, how to use that rifle and the sling and the sighting system in conjunction with your eyes and your body as a system coming together to get hits on target. So not all slings are created equal. So don't just make the sling an afterthought. Or don't just pick a sling because it says tactical. Pick a sling because it's practical. With that, your tactical verse of the day. This is from Proverbs 30. Every word of God is pure. He is a shield unto them that put their trust in Him. Amen. Thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.